The Berserk Mechanic in Warhammer Inquisitor Martyr is one of the two main ways you can scale your damage and shape your build. The other one is the Enraged state. Now, Enraged is much easier to understand and use because it mostly revolves around landing crits and stacking tokens that way. Berserk, on the other hand, is a little trickier. The tokens are a bit harder to gain and even harder to keep up, especially if you don't know what you are supposed to do. But if you manage to use it right, Berserk can actually give you some really strong advantages over Enraged. So today, I want to break down some of the best ways to set up a Berserk build, the benefits it brings, and of course a few tips and tricks I have picked up along the way. So let's get into it. Berserk is a token-based battle state. That means as long as you have got at least one stack of the Berserk buff, you are already gaining benefits. And those benefits stack higher with each token. For every stack, you get a 0.35% bonus to movement speed, a 2% bonus to damage, and 5 points of suppression regeneration every second. You can stack this all the way up to 100 Berserk tokens. But here is the catch. You will automatically lose one token every second. Now, Berserk tokens don't just pop up naturally while you're playing. The only way to get them is through certain enchants, and those only appear on relic, architect or ancient items. And while Enraged tokens are mostly built around crits, Berserk tokens are usually tied to you taking damage or triggering a massacre effect. Because of that, if you don't know the right gear to use, Berserk probably feels underwhelming, dangerous for yourself, or maybe even useless. Trust me, I thought the exact same thing for a long time. But it couldn't be further from the truth. While Enrage only gives you more damage, Berserk is more versatile. That movement speed buff is fantastic for melee fighters, letting you zip from one group of enemies to the next, and the suppression regeneration is massive for most characters. If you're playing anything other than the Crusader, you will notice the difference right away. Crusaders already have tons of suppression tools, but for someone like the Assassin, who usually struggles with suppression, being able to regenerate up to 500 suppression points per second can completely change how your build performs. And while Enraged tokens get removed per hit, Berserk tokens get removed per second, which makes them superior for any single target or fast hitting build, since it's much easier to keep them up. Of course, all of this becomes even stronger once you pair Berserk with the right gear setup. So now let's talk about how you actually get these tokens. There are only 5 enchants in the game that generate Berserk stacks. The first one is the most straightforward. You gain 1 to 3 Berserk tokens when you lose at least 10% of your HP in 1 second. This is by far the easiest and most reliable way to stack tokens. It can roll on relic quality belts and inoculators, and on ancient weapons with the Of Insanity enchant. The second one gives you 5 to 15 Berserk tokens when you trigger a massacre effect. This can be solid, but it really depends on the type of enemies you are fighting. If you're going up against low density enemies like the Eldari, you will struggle to trigger it consistently. On the other hand, enemies like Nurgle or Tyranids, who spawn tons of swarm enemies and horde units, are perfect for this setup. This enchant can roll on relic quality main implants and neural implants, and on architect eye implants, main implants, neural implants, plus on ancient eye implants. The third option is getting 5 to 15 Berserk tokens when you enter the exposed state, which happens when your health drops below 25%. You can even boost that threshold up to 35% with another enchant. Using this option can work, but it's definitely risky. To play with it safely, you need some kind of invulnerability mechanic. For example, you can use the Radical Armor enchant that teleports you away, or the Rosarius Force Field and enchants tied to it, or even the Ethereal Psalm Doctrine, combined with the boosted exposed threshold above 30%. All of those help you to play with this setup without constantly dying. This enchant can roll on relic quality belts and inoculators, and also on ancient signums. The fourth enchant gives you a 10% chance to blind nearby enemies and gain a Berserk token whenever you get hit. It sounds nice on paper, but in practice, the chance is just way too low. Even if you're surrounded by enemies, it's not nearly consistent enough to build around. Honestly, you can skip this one entirely. Also, this one only rolls on Relic or Architect main implants. And the last one is an enchant that gives you a 5% chance to gain a Berserk token for each burn applied. Now this would actually be the easiest method if it worked properly, but unfortunately the chance is either too low or the enchant itself doesn't work as intended. It only seems to function on certain weapons, or when combined with the Judgment mechanic from the Season of Judgment. I actually made a video breaking down this issue before, if you're curious. In short though, if you've got a belt of Judgment that triggers those spells, and yes, it even works on off-seasonal characters, you can use it with this enchant to max out your Berserk tokens really easily. But since it relies on a specific seasonal item, it's not exactly a reliable option for most players. This enchant of course would also work fine if you just play in the Season of Judgment and trigger those spells passively all the time anyways. And by the way, this enchant only rolls on Relic or Architect main implants. Before we move on, another way to gain Berserk tokens is if you are a Radical Inquisitor and use the corresponding perk, which gives you a token when losing 5% HP, plus a bunch of resource regeneration. I actually highly recommend going for a Radical path if you wanna use Berserk tokens, since it gives you this armor enchant, which solves a lot of the dying issues when your health gets too low. Plus you get a bunch of dot enchants as a Radical Inquisitor. A Berserk setup will be amazing for any dot build, as you will see later on. Next, let's talk about how to actually maximize your damage once you are stacked up on Berserk tokens. The first and probably strongest enchant is the one that gives you 2 to 5% bonus damage per Berserk token. This enchant can only roll on a Relic quality Signum. At full stacks, that's an extra 500% damage on top of everything else, which is absolutely massive. To put it in perspective, if you compare that to Enraged tokens, the math works out like this. You can run 20 or up to 29 tokens if you're using this main implant, and each of those tokens gives you up to 14% extra damage with this Signum enchant. That makes 406%, so Berserk tokens clearly pull ahead. But it's not just about the higher numbers. The more important difference is that Berserk tokens tick down at a steady rate, losing 1 per second, while Enraged tokens disappear every time you hit something. And if you're using this Signum, you actually lose even 1 more token on hit. So if you're running a build that uses single target or really fast hitting attacks, it's a nightmare to keep Enraged tokens up. Berserk doesn't have that issue, which makes it way superior for certain builds. There is also another Signum enchant worth mentioning, which boosts your suppression damage. This one doesn't sound flashy, but it makes a huge difference when you are fighting champions and elite enemies. Now the other incredibly strong enchant for Berserk is the one that grants up to 1% crit chance and 1 crit strength per token. And honestly, this one is insane. With it, you don't even need to roll crit chance on your gear anymore, because it's so easy to hit the 50% soft cap just from this enchant alone. On top of that, it can give you up to 100 crit strength, and you only need 150 total, so this gets you most of the way there, with barely any effort. And at 150 plus crit strength, your crits hit for 400% damage, while your dots tick for 200%. So if you're running a crit based or dot based build, this enchant is basically a dream. What's also really great is that it's available in 3 different slots: the main implant, your belt, and a Signum, though only on Architect rarity. That flexibility makes it really easy to slot into any build. The only other offensive enchant tied specifically to Berserk is the one that gives your attacks a 40 to 60% chance to cause bleeding. The downside is that it also removes an additional Berserk token every second. This enchant only shows up on a Relic Purity Seal. It can be strong for dot setups, but you really need to decide if the trade-off is worth it, since your token drain gets noticeably faster. Now Berserk isn't just about raw damage, it's also surprisingly good for keeping your health up. There are 2 enchants worth knowing about here. The first is a Relic enchant that regenerates between 8 and 20 HP per Berserk token. This can roll on an Inoculator or a Purity Seal. The second one is an Archetype Relic enchant that restores 8 to 20 HP on hit per token. This one can show up on Signims, main implants and belts. Both of these are really strong if you're running the HP loss or exposed state token generators, because they help stabilize your health while you are intentionally dipping low. So how do you actually put this all into practice? Let me walk you through a reliable way to stack tokens and stay alive. At the start of a mission, you find a small group of enemies and deliberately let them hit you. Don't kill them right away. You just want to take some damage without dying. To survive this, you will need either an invulnerability mechanic, like the armor enchant that teleports you away, or a really solid inoculator setup to keep you healed while you're farming stacks. One of my favorite combos here is the Blood Bomb component paired with the Salve boost, which makes it last 50% longer. Once you have built up somewhere between 30 and 50 tokens, your regeneration or HP on hit effects start carrying you. And from there it's much easier to snowball up to 100 tokens. Plus, of course, all of your other offensive buffs really start going once you have a good amount of tokens. There is also something important you need to keep in mind. Avoid gaining shield. In most melee builds, gaining shield is a staple, but with Berserk they're actually a problem. Depleting your shield doesn't trigger Berserk tokens, which means you are just wasting a chance to stack. Instead, focus on enchants like Life Drain, HP on hit and crit scaling. The one challenge with this playstyle is that you always need to be losing at least 10% of your health per second, or go regularly into the exposed state to keep those token gains rolling. On lower difficulties, enemies simply don't hit hard enough for that to happen consistently. That leaves you with two options: either strip defenses completely from your gear and passives, which makes you fragile but guarantees you to take enough damage, or keep your defenses and just play on higher difficulties, where enemies are strong enough to chunk you down. Personally, I recommend the second option. Play at +10 or higher. Not only does that fix the token problem, it also gives you more experience and better loot. Just remember, if your Berserk build feels like it isn't working, the issue might just be that you are on too low of a difficulty. So let me give you a setup I would recommend. First, use the 10% HP lost enchant on both your belt and inoculator. That way, you are reliably gaining 6 tokens every time you dip, which is enough to hit the cap. It's not enough to run with just one of these enchants. Alternatively, you can grab an ancient weapon with the Insanity enchant, which does the same thing, and pair it with one of the other items. Another solid option is to roll the exposed enchant on your belt and inoculator or signum, or use one of those enchants in combination with the 10% HP enchant. This setup is risky but powerful if you have the right defensive tools. Now, the Massacre Effect enchant sounds great on paper, but in practice it's not reliable enough to beat the other two options. Its only real upside is that you don't have to lose HP to use it, so if your plan is to farm lower difficulty missions where enemies die in swarms, you can try it out. Or if you only want to target farm specific enemy types like Nurgle or Tyranids. In that case, I would suggest stacking 2 copies on your main implant, eye implant or your neural implant. Of course, you could also integrate one Massacre Effect enchant in combination with the HP loss enchants. It will definitely give you a nice token boost once in a while. No matter which generator setup you go with, I would always combine it with the Berserk token damage increase signum and then slot in the crit chance and crit strength enchant in one of your open slots. Those two are basically must-haves for any serious Berserk build. The HP recovery enchants are nice to have, but not always mandatory. If you already have plenty of other healing sources, you can skip them. And finally, there are a few utility enchants that fit really well into Berserk setups. These include things like inflicting fear, reducing cooldowns, boosting movement speed, or adding damage reduction. They are not core to the build, but they can round things out depending on your playstyle. And that's pretty much everything you need to know to make a Berserk build work in Warhammer Inquisitor. It's a bit more finicky to set up than the Enraged build, but once you have got the right gear and enchants, it absolutely melts enemies and gives you way more flexibility than people realize. I hope this breakdown helps you get the most out of your tokens and maybe even inspires you to try out some of the new setups for yourself. If you found this guide useful, drop a like, and if you don't want to miss my upcoming builds, tips and deep dives, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I have got a bunch of more content on the way. So thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one.